Thanks for joining in on the acrylic paint pouring craze. We're a diverse group of non-artists, hobbyists, students, and artists across many disciplines. Before I did my first pour in June of 2017, I watched many videos and swore that unless the tests with the materials that I already had on hand were successful, I was not going to add this to my set of therapeutic artistic pursuits. I pulled out a can of regular WD-40 lubricant, not the kind that contained the magic elixir of silicone, isopropyl alcohol, and some old and very thick Elmer's glue all, as well as a set of very precious 1-ounce bottles of golden fluid acrylics. I researched the homemade pouring medium recipes that all the experts were using and challenged myself to develop a recipe that worked with my supplies. I pulled out my acrylic tubes and bottles after my first experiments ended up thick, cracked, and less than stellar, and committed to start my paint pouring adventure. Now you're ready to do your first acrylic paint pour. I participated in several online pouring groups, seeing many newbie questions repeated, and I saw a pattern. Many novices have never used acrylics before, and even those who have used acrylics for other things have never really considered how acrylics are made and how they should perform, or taking their quest one step further to understand the special characteristics of fluid acrylic. Further, my scientific side noted that while entertaining and anecdotal, many videos out there don't give you enough background in any single video, and some pass on snippets that they retract in later videos. The primary objectives of this course involve providing an assessment so that you can 1. Be aware of how much you know about acrylic paints, 2. Understand why fluid paints behave differently than acrylic tube paints, 3. Assess what art supplies you'll need to have on hand before you begin doing your first pour or decide to up your game to the next level, and 4. Revisit online videos to see who's offering up accurate technical information. Okay, be honest. How much do you know about any kind of paint? What do you know about pigments and binders? Have you ever before thought about density and viscosity and how liquids flow? What do you know about creating a painting without a paintbrush to move the paint around? Choose where you fit in the acrylic spectrum, and let's see what additional information will prepare you for paint pouring. Regardless of whether you, 1, have never used acrylic paints, 2, have experience with traditional tube paints and brushes, 3, possess a craft paint arsenal, or 4, own a set of fluid acrylic paints or acrylic inks. There always is more to learn. Some people who know me only by my art and photography seem surprised that I have a degree in chemistry. I'm surprised that I haven't shown my inner geek to them, as I hold a great fascination with the science behind art materials and processes. I promise to merely touch on the chemistry of the polymer molecules used to create the binder in acrylic paints. And I can hear you saying, phew, from here, but I will share some tidbits along the way. History. Acrylic paints are a relatively new painting medium developed in the 1940s, created for convenience in a growing suburbia market. These acrylic house paints took less time to prepare, clean up, and offered better performance than existing materials. Paints. The manufacturing process mixes pigments, acrylic binder, and water with other essential components into an emulsion to improve adhesion, flow, dry time, and more. When acrylic paints dry, water and other solvents evaporate and the binder particles fuse to each other. Formats. Acrylic paints include emulsion house paints, craft paints, and artist paints that range from thick and heavy to thin, light, and when you first begin working with acrylic pouring, you may not understand what basic acrylic mediums do, let alone why you need an acrylic pouring medium. Commercial acrylic mediums come in formulations to create specific effects and extend paints. Basic acrylic medium is a pigment-free extender containing additional binder that dries into a thin, glossy or matte film. Gel medium is a thicker, transparent, glossy medium. Specialty mediums are also available, like modeling paste, which contains additives that enable three-dimensional effects. an iridescent medium with mica flakes that add metallic sparkle. And then there's pouring medium, an extender that self-levels and flows in all the best ways. There are differences in quality between artist, student, craft, and house paints, mostly in pigment density, stability, and selection. So-called latex house paints contain no latex. They are acrylic emulsions that come in matte, gloss, and semi-gloss finishes and often carry a lifetime warranty. However, their stability in paint pouring applications is unknown. Craft paints are generally used for fun, creative projects and are designed for short-term enjoyment. They tend to use lower quality pigments and lower pigment density than other paints, which can affect coverage. Student paints were designed to meet the economical needs of art students, but generally have lower pigment density than artist-grade materials. Artist paints tend to be archival, containing high-quality pigments at high pigment density. Basically, they're the best quality available. What exactly makes fluid painting unique? Most of us are more familiar with thick acrylic paints that come out of artist tubes, and we certainly understand house paint, but fluid acrylics? Yeah, sure, they're liquidy, but what's the right consistency needed to get the paint to flow across a flat surface? What are the seemingly magical properties of fluid that end up creating the bursts of color that we see, looking like biological cells that we might see under a microscope? What can we do to enable spontaneous fluid motion to create amazing paintings and minimize paint mixing so that it doesn't all turn to mud? Let's look at viscosity. It's a term from physics that attempts to explain the property of a fluid that resists the force tending to cause the fluid to flow. Wait, what? We're talking about liquid fluids here. Shouldn't they naturally flow? Well, not quite. There are chemical and physical forces that try to prevent liquids from flowing, from surface tension that helps turn liquid into round droplets, to chemical bonds that keep a cup of water until something affects it, turning it into a steamy gas or a solid block of ice, to complying with the forces of gravity, and more. To simplify, for the purpose of art, think of viscosity as the thickness of a solution. In the viscosity graphic, they show examples from thin solutions, water, milk, and oil, to thick solutions, 3 different syrups. Add or take away heat or other components, and solutions flow differently, like slow as molasses in January. Now let's think about density. It, too, is a physical property. It accounts for mass or weight per unit volume. In the graphic creatively captured by sciencewonderhowto.com, they show layers of different liquids that sediment out differently based on their density. What kinds of additives might you need to add to your fluid paints to help you get cells? Because most of your fluid paints are closer to the consistency of thinner syrups, you'll want to think about adding things that are lighter than they are. Acrylic paints are emulsions, but not of oil and water. They are tiny beads of acrylic resin binder and pigment dispersed in water. Think about why people add silicone oil in this process. And emulsions also explain why you should not heavily mix silicone and acrylic paints, unless you want to minimize cells because you inadvertently create a mayonnaise-like emulsion. Let's shift gears and think a little bit about shopping, bargain shopping, shopping in your existing art supplies, or snagging some school supplies from your kids. Virtually or locally, shop well. My first attempts at this involved scavenging from my art supply stash. I wasn't sure whether this would be a great match for me. My other art pursuits have been more realistic and technical, and my previous attempts at abstraction left me disappointed. I've listed out supply sets that are suitable for 1. Those who have never done anything like this before and might have a very tight budget. 2. Those who have tube paints. Me, I still primarily use tube paints. 3. Those who can choose artist-grade fluid acrylic paints or for acrylic inks and commercial pouring mediums. My advice for you is to buy the best quality that you can. I lean towards starting out with student materials. If they're good enough for young people to learn in school and college, they're good enough for anyone. Here's a newbie checklist of the most important starting materials for fluid painting. With notable exceptions, like silicone and heat sources, this list can get you started. You'll have to check in with others regarding the recipes that have worked best for them. I recommend that you optimize a recipe to work best with your chosen materials. I do touch more on recipes in the classes that I teach and might share them in later videos. Start out with craft paints, then add just about any substrate or surface to paint on and a PVA-based pouring medium. Stock up on necessities to hold and mix your paints, protect your work surface, hold your surface up off your workspace, and assemble the supplies you'll need for cleanup. Be sure to check out the optional supplies too. This is actually my primary checklist, which I supplement with a few artist-grade paints and optional silicone and heat source supplies. I've had excellent results with my own recipes. 1 for converting tube paints to fluid paints by relying on the addition of a photography surfactant into my slippery diluent water, and 2 for a Floetrol-based pouring medium. This frugal list relies on tube paints, just about any substrate. You can add gesso to your supply list if you like to recycle surfaces, and a pouring medium. The pouring medium could be homemade using PVA, polyvinyl acetate glue, a paint extender like Floetrol, a commercial pouring medium, or a combination of these. Be sure to stock up on the necessities to hold and mix your paints, protect your work surface, hold your surface up off the workspace, and clean up. Also refer to the optional supply list on another slide. This list might be the easiest list and shortest pathway to success. It also might be the most expensive for experimentation until you get to the success level. It uses fluid acrylic paints and or acrylic inks and commercial pouring mediums developed specifically for this technique. You'll still need to stock up on the necessities and optional supplies. And then there are the optional supplies. Some might consider silicone and a heat source as required supplies, especially if you're most interested in getting cells. I've listed out several options here. Choose what works with your own preferences. There are also many supplies that you already have or can find in a local hardware store, online, or in a general store, depending on the techniques that you'd like to try. Try a mallet smash. Blow through a straw. Use a paint scraper and do a swipe. Smush paint with a balloon. Drip paint from a pipette. Squirt paint from a syringe. Spin your canvas. Wet. Make a mess. Drag a string through the paint. Spritz some alcohol on top. Put on some gloves and move the paint with your fingers. These techniques are limited only by your imagination. finally get to the good stuff. You want cells. Big, giant cells. Beautiful cells that show distinct rings of color. The biggest cells I've made involve the use of treadmill silicone and very little manipulation on the canvas. But I've gotten cells with just about every recipe I've tried except for the earliest recipes with homemade fluid paint and pouring mediums that were way too thick or way too thin to stay on the surface. After 6 months of developing my very own special recipe, I can almost get cells every time I want, especially using a silicone spray lubricant recipe. I also can mostly discourage cells when I don't want them. I do have occasional failures where I wipe the surface off and try again, but I keep trying. On the days when viscosity, density, and all other conditions are perfect, I revel in the cells that make me believe I'm creating my own little biological world with inorganic chemicals. Yeah, I'm still a science geek who loves art. When it comes to YouTube, there's always a broad range of quality videos out there. Here I've collected a set of 18 different people to watch, categorized, especially good for newbies, offer a creative approach and or a very entertaining mode of delivery, or provide very interesting demos either in fast motion or very focused kinds of methods, or using just literally a different perspective. For the newbies, I can recommend Anna Marie Riddenhoff, Debbie at Acrylic Pouring, Deliberately Creative, Miriam's Nature, Rick Cheadle, and Danny Clark. When it comes to creative and entertaining, I've added Ann Osborne on there because she's always an adventure to watch, and she does a lot of negative pour paintings. Karen Goodrich seems to be an instructor by nature, so she's very good at identifying what she plans on doing and executing it directly. Nikki James Birch uses a variety of techniques, and her title slides always give you an idea of what she's planning on doing. Rio Saras is a pair who do a little bit of humor and a little bit of wildness in their videos. They tend to have long videos, but they also offer up some live video demonstrations, which can be very interesting. Suave Arts, she also does a very focused presentation, and Wiggles Art does some spin pouring and a variety of other techniques. If your preference is just zen-like demo watching, I'd recommend Carl Mazer, Luna Creations, Mel D. Artist, Mixed Media Girl, Online Painting School, and Sarah Fezio. So in my humble opinion, these are people that you'd like to watch. Watch them in order if that makes more sense to you. And I would recommend that you try to watch several different people get comfortable with this, or well before you get comfortable with it, because everybody has a different way of doing things and a little bit of different information to add to your learning curve.